Hi everyone, and welcome to Communicating in a Crisis, Module 2, Lecture 2. We've discussed some of the theories behind crisis management. Now let's look at communicating before, during, and after a crisis event. Ideally, crises would never occur, but in the real world, we know that actions must be taken when a crisis happens. Communication before, during, and after the crisis is important. Key elements necessary when communicating during a crisis are credibility, compassion, control, and consistency. Both the company and the spokespersons must be viewed as credible sources. The key publics must view them as trustworthy and believable. Interestingly enough, credibility is tied to compassion and empathy. Research done during 9/11 by Susan Santos of the group called the Focus Group demonstrated that a person's credibility is assessed in the first 30 seconds. And the demonstration of empathy and compassion accounts for half of a person's credibility. Having control of the situation is also very important in communicating. The key publics are looking at the company and its spokespersons to tell them what to do, where to go, and exactly what had happened. The publics don't want the leaders of an organization to look weak or disorganized. If that's the case, the company's image will falter during a crisis. And finally, consistency of message is also very important. This is known as speaking with one voice. A company's crisis team needs to craft consistent messages throughout the crisis. Everyone who is representing the company needs to tell the same message, no deviation of the key messages. There will be more than one spokesperson for a crisis, especially if it's a major event. So even though there are many people representing the company, they all must speak with one voice, saying the exact key messages on the company's behalf. According to scholar Timothy Coombs in his book Ongoing Crisis Communications, in all crisis situations, there are several areas that need to be addressed. They are, first, the initial response, responding immediately to the crisis situation; reputation management, understanding that words and actions do affect how people perceive the organization; and 3, follow-up communication, communicating even when the crisis is over. Let's look at these in more detail. The initial response is the first statements made by the organization about the crisis. Ideally, the first statements should go to the employees and those directly affected by the crisis. However, oftentimes we are using the mass media and social media to respond to the crisis. The focus on initial response stems from the fact that first impressions form quickly and may influence the remainder of the crisis communication efforts with your public. A quick response gives the impression that you're in control, or at least gaining control of the situation. Conversely, a slow response makes an organization appear incompetent. Control is important to credibility. Crisis managers are encouraged to be quick, consistent, open, honest, sympathetic, as well as informative. Give as much information as you can, knowing that a crisis can create an information void, and that this void can be filled with speculation and rumor by outside sources, whether through social media or even the mass media themselves. If we look at the school massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut back in 2012, when Adam Lanza killed 20 children and 6 adults, we'll see that there was an information void. This crisis occurred on a Friday morning, and all the facts were not correctly gathered until Sunday morning. Speculation and rumor were rampant. It took 48 hours to finally have the correct story. Whatever you do, don't be silent. Silence is a passive response. The use of silence reflects uncertainty and passivity by the organization. Silence suggests the organization is not in control and is not trying to take control of how it or the crisis is being perceived by the public. Plus, it can lead to speculation that the company is at fault and is trying to cover it up. A quick response helps ensure that people receive accurate crisis-related information. So don't be silent. Get your response out there quickly. As I said in the previous slide, speaking with one voice means coordinating the efforts of the official spokespersons so that all of them are saying the same message. I must also stress that organizations need to designate key spokespeople and discourage other organizational members from becoming what we call unofficial spokespersons. An organization doesn't want a rogue employee talking to the media or expressing his or her views on social media. Also, stay on point by developing your key messages or talking points. During this stage, the key facts you have gathered and confirmed will be critical. When developing your message, it is important that you share only indisputable facts and show how your company is dealing with this issue. Ask yourself, what are the important points my organization needs to share right now with our public? With proper media training, you and your spokespersons should have the ability to effectively communicate these key messages, show and speak about them with concern, and respond to the tougher questions that the media may ask. An ill-worded response or speculation only creates more questions. If possible, try not to discuss economic issues on how much this crisis is going to cost your organization. During the beginning stages of a crisis, most people are not concerned about the economic loss to a company. They are concerned about their loss of jobs, perhaps the loss of life, and the loss of their way of life. If you are pressed by the media to discuss money, make it brief. And make sure your key message is more about the people affected by this crisis than the money lost by your company. No matter how sad the situation is, spokespeople cannot lose composure. Step away from the podium if you're going to cry in a media interview, and then return when you are composed again. You could have lost friends or even fellow employees in a major crisis situation, and you may become overwhelmed. But as a crisis manager, you must be composed. If not, let someone else in the organization handle it for you. Remember, in a crisis, you will want to express compassion for those impacted. A commitment to uncovering and communicating all pertinent facts is also important, and a pledge to make any necessary changes to prevent a similar crisis from happening in the future. You can see how important it is to have a quick and accurate initial response. But now, what do we do to maintain the company's reputation? Damage to a company's reputation is a danger during any crisis. Research now looks at how various communication strategies can be used to effectively maintain, or in some cases hurt, a company's reputation. Words and actions do affect how people perceive the organization. As we look at these various response strategies, you'll see how many of them follow along with the theories we discussed in the previous lecture. Research has pinpointed these responses as those most used in a crisis situation. Let me briefly go over them. And remember, I've enclosed a handout in your module which defines them more thoroughly. First, attack their accuser. When a company is verbally attacked by an outside source, the company may choose to turn the tables, so to speak, and attack back. Denial. Just what it says. The company denies any involvement in this crisis. Excuse. The company tries to downplay the crisis either by denying any intention to do harm or it had no control of the events that occurred. Blame or scapegoating. Casting the crisis into another source. Hey, it's not my fault. This is one that is very commonly used because no one wants to take responsibility for a crisis. Justification. Giving validation for what you've done and your actions, stating that the crisis was minimal and no one was seriously hurt. Ingratiation. Reminding your key publics that your organization has a strong past and a good reputation. This crisis is just a blimp on the radar. I personally like to use this one because it brings out the positive attributes of your company. Next, compensation. Giving money or other contributions to overcome the negative effects of the crisis. Corrective action. Making changes so that this type of crisis will not occur again. Victimization. Used when an organization has been a victim too, perhaps in a terror attack or a natural disaster. Full apology. Just what it says. The organization says, hey, we're sorry, and we mean it. Oftentimes we don't see this strategy being used. In deciding which strategy or strategies to use, it depends on the crisis situation. More than one strategy may be used at a time, while others may be totally ruled out because of the nature of the crisis situation. Oftentimes, we may begin with one strategy and then end with another, such as a denial at first, and then after you're caught lying, you'll use the full apology strategy. This was also shown in the Tiger Woods crisis, in which he first denied cheating on his wife, but was later found guilty of cheating several times with several different women. He then had to give a full apology for his actions. Crisis managers can best protect the company's reputation by understanding the crisis thoroughly and then deciding which strategy will work best in their situation. Finally, just because the crisis may be over and your company's name is no longer the hot topic in the news or in your community, crisis managers must understand that their job is not over. The communication must continue to key stakeholders such as employees, customers, or stockholders throughout the life cycle of the crisis. Some publics, such as investors or key community members, may have heard about the crisis through the media, but they need follow-up communication, either by email, phone call, newsletter, or other communication channels to reassure them that the organization is handling the crisis effectively. Remember that your key publics want to know what's going on, so updates are important. Make sure to announce the cause of the crisis as soon as you know what it was. Report any and all recovery efforts. Tell what actions you're taking for this to never happen again. And tell your publics of any outside support you're receiving, such as when the U.S. military helps with recovery efforts and sonar equipment or things like that for when planes go down in the oceans, like when Asia Air crashed or Malaysian Air crashed. Finally, make sure that if your company makes promises such as aid to the victims or being open and transparent with the media, that you follow up with those promises. If not, all follow-up communication to repair your reputation will be ruined. One last thought. Even though our job as crisis managers is to maintain the reputation of a company, remember, it's people who are affected by a crisis. Put yourself in their shoes and be compassionate to their situation. Hey, that ends our lecture for now. See you next time.